I'm getting tired, you guys, but we only have 2 more things to go. Period 6 is done in the book, so let's do it. Okay, let's see. Let's get everything on the screen here. Key Concept 6.3. The Gilded Age produced new cultural and intellectual movements, public reform movements, and political debates over economic and social policies. Roman numeral 1. New cultural and intellectual movements both buttress, which means to support, and challenge the social order of the Gilded Age. Okay, so let's go to A. Social commentators advocated theories, later described as social Darwinism, to justify the success of those at the top of the socioeconomic structure as both appropriate and inevitable. So we looked at the social Darwinism by reading Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. They are 2 different things, but the Gospel of Wealth uses like the ideas of social Darwinism, like it espouses them, right? So social Darwinism, I mean, in this time period, he's British, but, you know, like, ideas travel, and they were both English speakers. You know, Darwin had gone to the Galapagos Islands and written on Origin of Species, and comes up with his idea of natural selection and survival of the fittest. So then what happens is social theorists take this and say, yeah, not only does it happen biologically, but also, like, in society, culture, and economy. And so, I mean, you have a lot of people in America who subscribe to this philosophy, but you really see that in the Gospel of Wealth, where Carnegie uses that justification, like, me, a rich businessman, I deserve it because I've earned it, because I'm more fit. You also see that, like, when we read the Horatio Alger stories, good old Ragged Dick, you know, Alger, remember he had that Ragged Dick had that friend who kind of like was a shoe shine and never got ahead because he was lazy, but Ragged Dick, well, he got ahead. I remember his friend, his dad was like an alcoholic and had like abandoned him, where Ragged Dick, we didn't really quite know his origin, so there was this hope that maybe his parents actually you know, were better off and therefore passed on like these better genes. You know, like theories of eugenics were popular or kind of emerging at this time and gaining popularity, and that's where a lot of that grows from. Yeah, okay, so that's good. For A, so let's go on to B. Some business leaders argued that the wealthy had a moral obligation to help the less fortunate and improve society. So that's, you know, the Gospel of Wealth, right? That rich people have this obligation. Oh, hey, look, it says in the next part, as articulated in the idea known as the Gospel of Wealth. Now, Carnegie would say, how are you supposed to help people? Not through handouts or just giving people money. You're supposed to build like these institutions that help people who want to help themselves. So like Rockefeller endows University of Chicago. Carnegie endows Carnegie Hall and lots of libraries and other universities. Carnegie Mellon. Vanderbilt starts Vanderbilt. You know, so it's not just, well, here's some money. It's let me create something so people who, like the Ragged Dicks of this world, who do want to better themselves, can better themselves. And that goes on to say, and they made philanthropic contributions that enhance education opportunities in urban environments. Yeah, okay. We just talked about that. Okay, C. A number of artists and critics, including agrarian, utopian, socialist, and advocates of the social gospel, champion alternative visions for the economy and U.S. society. Oh, okay. That's a lot to include in one thing. Okay, a number of artists and critics. I mean, we talked about, or it was like one of your key concepts, or on one of the ID quizzes, one of your key terms were things like Looking Backwards by Edward Bellamy, who wrote like a utopian account of the United States. It's like 120 or 140 years into the future, and it actually created like a utopian society and worked out all the kinks of the Gilded Age. Other ones, one that actually a lot of you, well, some of you were supposed to have read, was I would say Upton Sinclair and the Jungle, which and he's somewhat of a utopian, right? Because at the end, Jurgis joins like the Socialist Party and you know, learns, you know, about socialism and communism, and you know, that's what Upton Sinclair would think of as a utopian. Okay, including agrarians. Trying to think what agrarian had a view, alternate view for the U.S. economy. I guess that would just be like the populace, right? Then we go utopian socialists. Good Lord, lots of people. Alternate views of the economy. Yeah. I can't think of anything more specific. I mean, I just don't want you to start thinking more of like the progressives here. They're wanting to keep it like, how do we reform in this society, in like the Gilded Age. So let's leave it there. Let's move on to the next one. Key Concept 6.3. Oh, we already did this one. Now we're on to number 2. Dramatic social changes in the period inspired political debates over citizenship, corruption, and the proper relationship between business and government. Okay, let's look at A. We're going really fast. A. The major political parties appealing to lingering divisions from the Civil War, right? The whole solid South, the South is solidly Democratic until after World War II, and contended over tariffs. So the Republicans want a series of higher and higher tariffs. I mean, you can trace that back to Hamilton, the Tariff of Abominations in 1828, the Republican Party platform, and the Republican tariff, the moral tariff that Lincoln brings with him into office in 1860, and still this issue throughout like the Gilded Age. I mean, that's the reason Cleveland is not reelected in 1888, but then is reelected in 1892, is all over the growing tariff. And then it goes on, and currency issues, which we talked about the tariff in class, but we definitely spent more time on currency issues just because sometimes it's a little bit harder to understand this silver versus gold and 16-to-1 ratio, which is 16-to-1 ratio. They're always populists are always trying to get back to, but it really, we abandon it. We never get anywhere near it again. So people like Bryan wanting the free and unlimited coinage of silver, and then you have like the gold bugs and the debate among them. It says, even reformers that argued that economic greed and self-interest had corrupted all levels of government. I don't really know of like a specific person we talked about in the class, but there is this overwhelming concern with corruption in the government. You might even point to like the Pendleton Civil Service Act for that, to end corruption in the government. But I can't think of any one person in particular we talked about. Okay, so let's move on. There we go, that's better. To B, many women. Ooh, hey, finally. 51% of the population, and we get one part of the key concepts. Okay, so many women sought greater equality with men. Greater equality, I don't know, maybe inequality? Okay, social commentary over. Often joining voluntary organizations. So I think back in like the 5.3 video, we talked about NAWSA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. I would say that's one example of voluntary organization trying to get suffrage for women in this period. Oh, you guys read As a Do Now way back when Susan B. Anthony voted, and she votes illegally and she's brought to trial, and so her speech about why women should get the right to vote, often relying on their domestic roles, that they shouldn't get the right to vote in spite of them, but because they're in charge of the domestic sphere. Also, voluntary organizations, a big one would be temperance. We watched that video that nobody ever remembers on Frances Willard and her temperance society, the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Organization. If you remember it, you remember that they would have literature like saying that you could spontaneously combust from drinking alcohol. But the video you all remember is always Carrie Nation and her hatchetation, where she takes her hatchet, and she's part of first she's part of the WCTU, a little too radical, so then she goes on, I think she's a member of the Anti-Saloon League. Going to college, Oberlin College, first college to admit African Americans, also the first college to admit women. I mean, that was back in, I think, like the 1830s. But more women are going to college. If you read from Miss Stumphy, the summer reading book on The Secret History of Wonder Woman, there's a chapter there in the beginning that's about how from the 1880s to 1900s to 1920s, more and more women every decade went to college. Promoting social and political reform. So now the bulk of progressivism is covered in the Period 7 Key Concept Guide. But progressivism does start in the late 1880s and the 1890s as a way to address some of the problems with the Gilded Age. The key concepts and the College Board have decided to separate and keep the problems all in Period 6 and the proposed solutions in Period 7. But you can use some of that progressive stuff. It mentions here specifically like Jane Addams, the founder of Hull House, which was a social reform. But remember, Jane Addams was also an advocate for women's right to vote. We had read a passage by her where she was saying that women should be granted the right to vote again because they know the problems of the cities and the domestic spheres, and should have the right to vote because of that. It says work in settlement houses to help immigrants adapt to the U.S. language and customs. So settlement houses, middle-class people lived, especially young women, lived in the settlement houses and provided services to the people who lived in those communities. Those were the immigrants who lived in the communities. Babysitting, language, sanitation, like home economics, all kinds of classes and services to those communities. Part of it was to help them assimilate and acculturate to American society, and part of it was to help try and cure some of the problems of the Gilded Age. Trying to think of anybody else besides Jane Addams I should mention here. No, we talked a little bit about Henry Street House, but now that you have the new textbook, it's not even really, I think, covered in the textbook. So let's move on. Oh, hey, look. Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, right? Separate but equal. That upheld racial segregation helped to mark the end of most of the political gains African Americans made during Reconstruction. I mean, really, since 1877, there's been a whole backpedaling in the South, but Plessy v. Ferguson really codifies into law this whole separate but equal, and really, for the next 65, 70 years, instills like a Jim Crow apartheid system in the South. Let's see, facing increased violence, KKK, lynchings, discrimination, to say the least, and scientific theories of race, African American reformers continue to fight for political and social equality. And so we talked about two reformers. One is bigger in Period 6, and a couple more are bigger in Period 7. Your Period 6, Ben Ruvo, if you're listening, I hate to say it, you're going to groan, but it's Booker T. Washington, right? The Atlanta Compromise, cast down your bucket. Wherever you are, whatever your lot in life is, you should just work really hard at that. Don't aspire for too much. Work hard in vocational and like largely vocational fields. Like if you're a farmer, you're a sharecropper, just work really hard and show white people that you are worthy of more through your hard work. And eventually, gradually they will give you equal rights. Just really, really, really gradually in the United States. Really gradually. The other one, W.E.B. Du Bois, I'm going to say for Period 7, because Booker T. Washington for the Gilded Age is really the number one African-American leader. There's something else I want to say. The Tuskegee Institute, right? That's a vocational and normal school, kind of like Carlisle School was, like a normal school. We said, Carlisle was assimilating Native Americans, like we were trying to assimilate immigrants, but also you see this vocational education emphasis for African Americans and as well as Native Americans. And I'm going to say Du Bois for Period 7. Okay, so that is all of Period 6. Whew, I think I did it in 3 videos. I'm so proud of myself. Okay, maybe tomorrow night, if I'm extremely bored, I will move on to Period 7. You can't see that, can you? See Period 7. Okay, maybe tomorrow night. We'll see. That's a lot to cover. Okay, goodbye.